so this session is basically, the idea is that it's a really practical session, that it's about learning the lessons that we learned, or as much of that as possible, during our community shares campaign that we ran last spring. Now we learned loads, and there was a lot of work that went into that. So there's, we could actually speak about this for days. It's obviously a limited amount that we can do in this hour session, but we will try and give you some highlights. And then what we've thought is that we could offer a larger session later on during the year. So if people do want to get in touch about that, let us know. You can email us about that on mail@kindling.org.uk. But for now, what we're going to do, I've got here 3 brilliant speakers. Chris, who is co-founder of Kindling Trust and Kindling Farm, who was key during the campaign. So we'll talk about that experience. We've got Zoe from the Ecological Land Cooperative, who gave us lots of brilliant advice, but has also been involved in running lots of community shares campaigns as well, so can speak from her experience. And then Josh, who's the business development manager, is that right, of Ethex, and that's the platform that we use for our community shares campaign. So has lots of experience of what they can offer, and also other community shares campaigns. So without further ado, I think that's everything. I'm going to hand over to you, Chris, and I'll give you a 1-minute warning.
Okay, so hi everyone. I'm really sorry, this is going to be super quick. I think I've got 30 seconds per slide. If you don't know the community shares campaign that we ran last year, just really briefly, we had a farm we had hoped to buy. We ran a community shares campaign through April, May and June. We hoped to raise between 350 and 600,000 pounds. And we were offering community shares at either 0, 1, 2 or 3% interest. And the campaign got off to a flying start. I'm going to share with you the lessons we learned, but obviously we ran this during COVID. So I'm going to talk a bit about kind of the uniqueness of the campaign during COVID, but also share with you lots of things that we learned. Our campaign was quite unique in that we went into it not having a farm completely nailed down. We went into the campaign with a farm that we were really keen to buy, had worked with the owner on purchasing. In the first third of the campaign, first month, we actually raised our upper target, but we were also informed that the farmer wasn't yet ready to sell to us. So then we had a month within the middle of the campaign where we talked to him, looked at our options, and basically rewrote our business plan to reflect the fact that we didn't have a farm. Went back to our existing investors who had made an investment in the first month, asking them if they were cool if we continued with the campaign, just emphasizing the fact that we were going to have to look for another farm. And then we spent the final third month, June, basically trying to raise as much money as we could. Yeah, this all during COVID. So I'm just going to just throw numbers and graphs at you. And as Helen said, we will be able to talk more about this later on. So the cost of the campaign, we spent about, well, you can see it here. We spent about £15,000 on the campaign itself, about £10,000 in the preparation, and then there were platform fees to Ethex and others. So, you know, it did cost quite a bit of money. And we feel these costs would have been the same with or without COVID. We ended up physically doing different things, and we involved volunteers in different ways. But we feel that this was about the right amount of money to be spent on a campaign. We spent an awful lot of time before the campaign, and I guess that was one of the real big lessons for us, all the work involved beforehand, the preparation, business planning, and the like. And then during the campaign, it was a bit of we were expecting to spend a lot more time during the campaign, but there were lulls during the campaign. There were weeks when it was really busy, there were weeks when it was less so. And we involved our volunteers, but only for one-off events. We were expecting to use and support volunteers throughout the entire 3 months, but over the COVID situation, we didn't really kind of utilize our support as much as we could have done. Okay, so in the end, after the campaign, we ended up with just over 600 investors. We raised over £1 million, and this wouldn't have been possible without the Ethex platform and all the support we had beforehand and all the preparation we'd done beforehand. So to run the campaign, we obviously needed funding, and we had support from Reach and Booster, and we also used a lot of our own investment. We had a lot of hidden costs, my time, Helen's time, and then we used quite of our own funds to pay for the fees and to pay for other staff time. Yeah, this is basically a breakdown of the costs. This is the staff time. This is what we ended up with at the end of the campaign. And yeah, I think I've got to here. So the support, the financial support we got, yeah, the investment breakdown. So 800,000 came from individuals and organizations, but we also had a lot of support from match investors, and the timing of those was really key. We had some who invested at the start to help us get the momentum going, and then halfway through the campaign as well. And again, we can talk about that another day when we have more time. So in terms of our investors, this surprised us. I think that we were surprised about the breadth of support, both the types of people, their motivations, but also geographically. We were expecting most of our investors to come from Greater Manchester and the Northwest. They did, which I'll show you on the next slide, but we did have a lot of support from around the UK. And I think possibly that was down to Ethex's kind of reach. So when you look at a breakdown, we were really happy to see that the majority of our investors were investing under £1,000. A lot of people from Greater Manchester, majority of people from the northwest of England, and the majority of investment coming from the northwest. But again, we can share all this with people at a later date. The other thing that we were really keen to find out was how effective the campaign was. You know, was it worth us spending that £1,000 on social media adverts? You know, did our like lovely materials make a difference? Particularly because the campaign we had planned before COVID was very different to this one, and we're still trying to kind of get our heads around this. But straight after the campaign, we did a survey. 100 people completed the survey for us, and we're gonna do another one in a month or two's time. But basically, we kind of asked some questions like this, like, how did you find out about the campaign? Obviously, social media was important, friends and family, but then so was Ethex. If we'd done this when COVID wasn't around, we would have expected a lot more of our engagement to be around events. We had a lot of events that we were planning to do. We'd put a lot of time into kind of designing pop-up materials and props for events and festivals and stuff like that. Another interesting thing for us was, did anyone take part in any of the activities that we designed? So we put a lot of effort into online webinars, surgeries, and the like, and a lot of people didn't come to those. We kind of understood that people liked them being there, and they had planned to come to some, but very often people didn't make it. But just them knowing that we had run a webinar on community-owned farms or cooperatives within the food supply chain, I think gave people a bit more confidence in kind of our plans and our aspirations.
Chris, 1 more minute.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, so we asked people what events they'd been to and stuff like that. So that's given us an idea of kind of what was worth doing. We also asked people what motivated them to invest, and this will really help us in the future with our comms, but also the activities and the events that we plan to do. Yeah, what motivated them to invest? You know, was it that 3%? Was it, you know? And again, this is really helpful for us, and it'll be really interesting to repeat these questions in a month or two's time. And we hope that that will really influence kind of other people's community shares campaigns. I mean, we've got to take this, you know, this is only 100 people, obviously 100 motivated people over 600 investors, but it's been really helpful for us. And just the last two, really, we felt that we were always giving too much information. So this was interesting to see. And we had a unique campaign in that it kind of changed halfway through. You know, we started a campaign with a farm, with these finances, we paused, and then we kind of restarted it without that farm, with a plan to find another farm, with changed finances, with more money raised through community shares campaign. So we were keen to hear from people about, you know, did we communicate that well? I'll stop there. As Helen says, if you're interested in finding out more and us drilling down into this further, then yeah, just give us an email. Cool.
Great, thank you, Chris. Then we're going to head on to Zoe. Now, I've seen your question. We will come to that at the end. I've made a note of it. Zoe, are you ready to?
I'm ready.
Brilliant.
Screen share. As Helen mentioned, I had the pleasure of setting up the ELC as part of a small team. So I was involved in the business planning and designing the business model and financial forecasting, and these first 2 of 4 share offers. And what I'm just going to take you through today is the difference in the approaches that we took. I mean, mainly there's 3 different approaches. The first one, we hadn't even established ourselves as a cooperative. We were still just a company. And as a company, you're not allowed to fundraise for community shares, but you can take money from high net worth individuals. The benefit of taking this approach was that it was easy to contact high net worth individuals. We didn't need a lot of marketing resources. As you can see, though, we only raised £65,000. Unlike Kindling, for our first farm, we only needed 100,000. So we were able to bump up the 65,000 that we raised from high net worth individuals using loan stock and a secured commercial loan, a bit like a mortgage. I won't talk about this approach because less of you will be using this, but just to flag up that that is available as a company before if you go through the route of being a company and then establishing as a cooperative, you can raise money in this way. And then a whole 7 years later, we did our second share offer. And this time we were a co-op, and this time we could take investment in the form of community shares. But we were still quite young and hadn't really built much of a reputation and didn't feel quite ready to work through ethics. I think partly because we just didn't have the finances, also in terms of any kind of savings or enough of that truck history to be able to pay their fees as well. So we did it in-house. And at that time, and still to this day, we received a large grant to pay for business development support. We received something like £40,000, people helping us make sure our financial forecasts were really good, and that our share of documents were correct and well developed. And obviously we could then sell community shares. And the other benefit of doing it ourselves is we became really familiar with the requirements of administering a community share offer, which is no small thing, and did help us then also when we went into the community shares that we did with Ethex. But on the negative side, you know, it took so much work from us to do all of our own marketing administration. Ethex takes that part away from you in terms of the connection with the potential investors and answering questions and taking their investments. And it still had somewhat of a limited reach. You can see, although we were only raising money for a second site, we did still need to go after another form of finance because we still didn't raise quite enough to cover the land and our operations and development costs of that land. Then moving into the next 2 share offers, I mean, you can see the step up there in the amount that we were able to raise by using Ethex. And in the next slide, you'll see when we asked investors where they came from, something like 70% of referrals came through Ethex. So far wider reach, less administration, because Ethex takes that away from you. But then, of course, you do have those additional costs, which Chris highlighted in his presentation. So that's the breakdown that I referred to. You see that 74 of the people that participated in the survey, which is pretty much 74%, that's actually is a little less, isn't it? But came through Ethex. And a bit like the Kindling Trust, the reason why people are investing are mainly to make use of their savings to better society and environment. And for us, it's also food and farming. And really very few people are looking for a safe or good return on their investments. And then finally, Chris mentioned that we use this option, which I don't think has been used before, where we said to people when they're investing, we could give you the full 3% that we're offering, but if you're happy to take less, let us know. And it's not to say that every year we do give this, because it's up to the members every year to decide how much they want to distribute in terms of interest on shares. But you can see there that we have almost 25% of our about 400 investor members wanting to not take the full amount, which is obviously really, really helpful in terms of keeping down the cost of borrowing. And that's me for today.
Great, thanks, Zoe. That was really interesting. Josh, are you ready to roll?
Yeah, thanks, Helen. Yeah, I'm not going to take the risk with any slides. I'm just going to talk. Hopefully that's all right. Yeah, so for those who don't know Ethex, we're an online platform. We enable people to invest their money into highly impactful organizations. And the idea being is that by shifting finance away from traditional investment into this more targeted type of investment, that we can sort of, we can create a better world. And that's why people sign up and use Ethex. We've got about 20,000 investors signed up on the platform in total. We've been running since 2013. We've raised pretty much £100 million in that time. So there's obviously a demand out there, and there's a real demand for sustainable land use as something for people to invest into. So we've seen the offers for, so we've done 2 offers for Ecological Land Cooperative, the Kindling Farm offer. We've also done a couple of offers for Stockwood Farm. And I'm talking now having good conversations with a sort of micro dairy and a care farm in Wales. And we always see really, really good take up. And I think what's really interesting when you look at both Kindling and Ecological Land Cooperative is you get high numbers of investors in those businesses. It's not necessarily high value investments. It's not 5-figure investments, but it's a lot of people come in and support it, which I think is interesting. So yeah, all of the offers we've done today, have been community shares. So both the ELC offer and the Kindling offer were community shares. So obviously you need to be a community benefit society or a cooperative in order to issue these. But there are other, you can have other organisational forms, and there are other types of investment that could be issued through the platform. So, for example, debt through the issue of a bond, or it could be ordinary shares as well. So it's not just limited to community shares. In terms of the minimum requirements, really the minimum to raise on Ethex is about £150,000. And the reason for that is just below that level, because there are some fixed costs, the cost of capital doesn't stack up for the businesses and for us as well in terms of the volumes of money coming through the platform. But from 150,000, then we can go pretty much anywhere. So Kindling raised £1 million plus, which is a fantastic result. But we have had offers for other projects which have raised up to £5 million. I think the key thing that we are looking for is that there's a viable business model. There's really strong impact that's embedded and really baked into the business. There's a robust financial plan, good forecasts, and those forecasts really need to show that if you're taking on investment, how are those investors going to receive any interest that they might get, and also how do they get their capital back eventually. And the key way of all that's presented is in an offer document. So any organisation listing on Ethex will need to pull together some kind of offer document, usually 20 to 25 pages, just giving all the key information that an investor needs to make an informed decision. It's really important, both ELC and Kindling. I know you talked about proportion of coming from Ethex, but actually it's so important that you engage your base, your own stakeholders, before coming and listing on the platform. And the reason for that is it's the way crowdfunding works. So if something lists on the platform and it's on zero, it can stay on zero. if there isn't momentum into that offer. And so this is why we say to everyone, have people lined up ready to come in from the start. Because as soon as an offer starts to move and people see investment going in, that's a validation of that project and that offer. And then money follows in, and money from the crowd and from our investors tends to follow in once there's that first surge has come in. So one of the things I would say was, Keenan, and I'm not sure how early both ELC and Chris were warming up their investors ahead of the raise. I think both of you did a pretty good job of doing that, but start as early as possible if you are thinking of doing a raise. And also don't be shy of looking at blended finance approaches. You know, we see a lot of offers that there might be a loan in there might be mortgage in there might be grant funding in there, and then alongside that sits this other equity that you get from the crowd. Or it could be equity, or it could be debt, as I say. But very often with community shares, there's a layer, it's layered in with other forms of financing as well. We do have potential for match funding on the platform. So at the moment we have the People's Postcode Lottery, who are quite open to investing across a wide range of different projects, and farming is one area they've been invested into. Post raise, we can also manage your investor register. So this is what Zoe was talking about, taking some of the administration away. So we can, post raise, we can maintain the list of your data of your investors. We can make payment runs on an annual basis. So it just takes a lot of that overhead away from the business, and we can provide that at quite a subsidized rate certainly for community benefit societies and cooperatives. So that's kind of the basics on Ethex, but I'd just like to flag something up, and maybe a bit for debate and conversation, is there seems to be quite a lot of money lining up to go into sustainable land use. People might be aware, but there's been a government fund called the Natural Environment Investment Readiness Fund, or NERF, which is actually £10 million in total, which is giving out grants for organisations to get investment ready. And you know, these grants can be up to £100,000. They've given out 27 of them, so there's still a lot of money out there. And this is about kind of developing replicable and scalable models, and it could be creation of new woodland, natural flood risk management, improving water quality, anything that seems to be tackling climate change, restoring nature or rewilding, or habitat creation, peatland restoration, sustainable drainage, river catchment, this kind of thing. And so I think there is a definite real crossover with the sustainable farming area. I think it's really fair to say that the business models for this are evolving and haven't evolved yet. They're not fully there yet. I think we'd need to be waiting until, for example, there's a carbon market where carbon credits could be traded, or there is some form of credits for biodiversity units, and how revenues for that come in. It's still to be decided. That's still to be crystallized. But I think it's really worth flagging it up, because I think there are investors out there looking to invest into these kind of models. And so I thought it'd be a useful thing to just chat about that as well. So that's me done. Over to some questions.
Great. So that's brilliant. Get you back. That's great. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for sticking to time. So we've got quite a few questions that have come through in the chat. So I think, shall I just read them out to you? And if anyone thinks that I haven't presented their question properly, maybe stick your hand up if I can see you, put something in the chat. So the first question was for Chris, looking at when you spoke about the motivations that people have for investment. A big one was other, and there was a question from Nat about whether there was more information on that. So I don't know if you wanted to say a little bit more about that.
Yeah, that's one of the slides I took out. I think when people put other, they kind of were drilling down into the topic in more detail. So there was nothing, you know, outside of those kind of broad areas. But yeah, we can share that with people.
I think also one of the ones that I remember from other was people saying that they wanted to learn from that to that they wanted to learn from our share offer and be involved in the Kindling Farm model to be able to replicate it, and that felt really encouraging to us, because that was sort of one of our big motivators as well ourselves. So Emma, did changing, this is a question for Zoe, did changing from a company to a co-op have implications for your loans?
No.
That's all right.
But short.
A little thumbs up there. And there's another question for you, Zoe, here. And I know that we had a grant as well, but where did your business development grant come from? That's from Nat.
That came from the National Lottery.
Okay, and Chris, we got a development.
Yeah, so we had development grants from Booster, which was part of us getting the community share standard mark, and Reach, which I think was supported through Ethex. I think Ethex put us towards that. Those are the main two.
Great. And Zoe, with National Lottery, was it a certain strand that you got? Do you remember?
It was. I'll quickly go away while you're taking the questions and find out.
I mean, this area is changing so rapidly. Like, it changed a couple of times during, the year or so that we were planning ours. It's just something you've just really got to stay on top of. I'm sure there are more opportunities coming.
Yeah. There is a question here about the size of Kindling's farm and what the funds raised to buy in terms of building land infrastructure, machinery, etc. So I'll hand that over to you, Chris.
We based our business plan on the original farm that we had hoped to buy, and we basically looked at our market. So we know our market really well, and we kind of brought those two together. This was Helen mostly did the work on this, with support from Mark Simmons and the Reach support. So yeah, we based it on our market and a 120 odd acre farm. That obviously was reasonably straightforward when, and I'll answer another question I noticed there, when we lost that farm, we obviously had to go back and look at the figures again. And every time we looked at a farm 2 days ago out in Cheshire, we were looking at a farm that we got valued in November that we were quite keen on buying. Poor old Helen and a couple of other people have to basically rewrite the business plan or tweak the business plan. And the way that we've done it with our investors is we got to the end of the community shares campaign and said to everyone, okay, we are going to spend a year looking for a farm. And after that year, so come July, August this year, if we haven't found a farm, people can get their money back. So their money is sat safely in a bank account. When we do find a farm that we want, we'll get it valued, we'll do all the due diligence stuff, probably advised by Zoe and other people who've done this before. And we'll take the business plan back to the investors, and people can choose to invest with us or not. So people have an opportunity then to withdraw their funds. So if we come up with a crazy plan and they don't like the farm, they don't have to invest in us.
Great, thank you. There's a question here, another question from Sue, that is about what our policies are on buying back shares, which I think can also be for Zoe. I don't know, do you want to start?
Yeah.
Go on, Zoe.
So just to say, I found out that it was a big potential fund that we received it for. I don't know if it's still running, that fund. No, it's not. Okay. We don't have a policy on what we call an open share offer in terms of letting new shares in and shares going out, except it's got to fit with our ongoing business plan, which is to say, if somebody, we always have to be ready for people to leave, because otherwise, you're not a reliable investment. So we always have to have cash in the bank, and in our share offer document, we say we'll make sure we'll have at least 10% available to leave every year. And in terms of buying back in people who shares, in terms of allowing people to buy shares between the share offers, that depends on whether or not we really do need extra cash, because there's no point in bringing in cash if you don't need it, because you're just paying interest on it. And it also might depend on how much interest they're looking for. So it really is a case-by-case basis, and we do reflect on the business plan every time we make those decisions.
Chris, do you want to add to that, or because we kind of based it largely on ELC, didn't we?
yeah, we did.
And I think for us, because we got the community shares mark, we would have to, I think in that we had to say our share will end at this certain date, and if we wanted to start a new one, it would be a whole new one, and we would have to do that as a whole new thing, because that was one of the criteria of the share mark. Do you want to add something to that, Josh?
I was just going to say, when just more generally, when looking at the financial modelling, the kind of what we see quite a lot is a 5% return, a 5% share withdrawal modelled per year. Now, this isn't to say that there's an absolute commitment from the business to do that every year, but it's just, this then says, okay, it gives a kind of timeline horizon for the offer of approximately 20 years. It helps, I think, a little bit for investors to visualize what the likely time span of that investment is. But what I think was quite interesting is, though, most model at 5%, the withdrawal rates tend to be significantly less than that, and the people stay invested in this type of business.
Yeah,
that's what we find as well.
I would like to just jump actually to a question that I saw earlier on at some point that I think is related, which is, isn't this just begging by a different name or something like that, which I think is a very good question that I would like to put to you all.
I'd start off on that. It's not, because there's a commitment to pay investors a return, and I think that's what's really great about it, is that there is a relationship that's built between these two organisations, two groups. So you've got investor groups and you've got the business, and you're paying a 3% return is a fairly low return, pitched around about inflation, maybe a little bit below that. But the fact that there is that commitment to pay that return is a recognition by the business of the value of that money that's being put into the business. So it's not begging, because there's a return being paid, there's a commitment to pay back the finance at the end of a period of time as well. So I'd say it's quite different.
Any other comments on that from me?
Well, just as well as the 3%, I mean, people get their money back as well, but they also, not so much now with COVID, but before COVID, we also had a lot of member events. So you would be invited to a pretty good event every year where you would hear a speaker, you'd have nice food, all of that sort of stuff, and probably more so at Kindling than at our farms.
Yeah, I mean, like the challenging the food farming system is so vast that we're always going to start these projects with a blend of investment, loans, and grants. There's no way that we can bring about the changes we need on the scale that we need them without kind of making these compromises that we have to make. And I think that's just, we talk about it a lot, but it's good to be kept on our toes, to be honest.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think that this way of doing it for me personally was very much the opposite to that. It was about saying, this isn't asking you to give us money, as the others have said. This is about asking you to be part of this, and also it's an investment rather than a donation, which also leads on to another question, which was, how do the share owners influence the farm? So I think that's a really important thing as well, of like, do they? Because in some models they do and in some they don't. So I don't know who wants to.
Well, with ours, we've set up as a multi-stakeholder co-op. So we have different categories of members. So we have the workers. We obviously don't have any workers yet, but when we do, they will be part of the co-op. The tenants, because we hope the farm will have lots of kind of diverse businesses on there, and our investors. yeah, it's basically constantly balancing those kind of three needs. So investors can come onto the board and be kind of directors of the business, really.
Zoe, have you got, or Josh, you got any?
No, we designed our model as you did for stewards, we call them farmers, to be on our board. But the truth is that hasn't actually developed that way, and it's something that we're dealing with now. So as to say, we're making sure now that we're getting stewards onto our board, because we feel that's pretty critical.
Yeah, I mean, the only other thing to add to that is, yeah, but you become a member of the organisation. You know, you have voting rights. You can put yourself forward to be on the board. So it does create an opportunity for people, if they want to become highly engaged with influencing the business. I think
it's just, we found that the smallholders were just so busy setting up their farm business that they found it very hard to give the time to then also be a director. So that's one of the barriers that we're now trying to deal with, to make sure we get farmers onto our board, our farmers, not just farmers, but the farmers on our sites.
A related question that's just popped up is what happens when the workers leave? Do they lose their membership?
I think that might have been, yeah, for us. I mean, members, you can be a worker and an investor. But yeah, just like any workers co-op, once you leave the co-op, you stop being a worker member.
Yeah, but could become an investor, support member if you invested. Just quick, moving on to, there's a couple of comments directed at Ethex. One is what business type is Ethex, and the other is about the famous Ethex questionnaire that you have to fill in. Right. So I just wondered if you wanted to talk about that.
I'll do the easy one first, which is, we're a not-for-profit. We're a company limited by guarantee. We're a not-for-profit. Is how we're set up. So that's the type of business that we are. Yes, the questionnaires. So we have a duty to ensure that anyone who invests through Ethex understands the risks and understands that they might not get their money back. And so we have a questionnaire set up when people first register that then asks some questions to ensure that those risks are understood. However, we have been trying to refine those because they have been a bit of a barrier, and we recognize that, and that for some people, you know, people who are you know their way around investment, that they've still managed to not pass those questionnaires. So we have actually reviewed them and updated them, and we've created much more simpler, straightforward ones, we think, and we've been tracking that on the website and where people drop off, and it seems there's much less of a drop off. So apologies to anyone who struggled originally. You know, it was done through the best intentions that we need to protect people, but we could have done the questions better. We think we have now done
that. So there's a few questions here about the getting a return and about the return. So the first one from Addy is, how do investors get a return on a flood management project?
Yeah, okay, so my understanding of this is it's very complicated, but basically, where you have a flood management project, surrounding businesses can claim a discount on their insurance, and that there is then there is some sharing of that discount that's taking place, but with the organisation or with the site providing the flood management risk. It's not all insurers that do this. My understanding is it's just Aviva that's doing it at the moment, and it is being developed. But this is one of the models. Now there might well be other models that come along as well, but this is the one that I've seen so far.
Great. Then we've got, how do you make sure you have enough money each year to pay interest on the shares? Yeah, that was for Chris.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of a question. I think you're best answering that, Helen, but I mean, basically, we've built a business model on the market here in Manchester, and we are not going to overstretch ourselves and buy a farm that's too expensive. So just before, in November, there was a farm we were really keen on, got it valued, got everything lined up, but the owner was just asking for too much, and we just couldn't financially make it work. And yeah. What we want to do is establish a working farm and then build from there. So it's really important that we get this right. You know, people are watching us, and you know, we want this to be as stress-free as possible. So yeah, we're not going to rush into the wrong farm or make promises that we can't keep. So that's kind of it for us. It's like, how many carrots can we grow in that field? How many potatoes can we grow in this field? You know, how much added value can we make in that barn? So yeah, that's the core of it, really.
And there's also someone has just referred to the business plan that we have online, and asked if we had any help with that. So it is, as Chris mentioned, that there is a lot of work went into our business plan, and we've got a great advisory group, of which Zoe is one. And one of the bits of advice we got very early on was start with your markets, and don't set this up until you really know you've got a market for what you're going to sell, because otherwise you can't make the business model work. So that, yeah, a lot went into that. Josh?
Yeah, I just wanted to say on paying interest as well, that, you know, you have a lag built in before interest kicks in. I think that's really, really important to understand, because I think, you know, that flexibility to enable the business to get going, to get up and running, to have the revenue starting to come into the business, then enables you to start paying that interest rate. And that's why community shares are, you know, they're not like debt. There's not an immediate need to start paying interest as there normally is with debt, and there's flexibility about when that interest is paid. And I think that's one of the beauties, particularly when you're doing, you know, you're starting up a project and you're getting it up and running.
Yeah.
And you can also ask people if they want to accrue their interest, which is, so rather than paying it out to their bank accounts, you can add it to what they've got with you, yeah, which just means that you've got less pressure on your cash flow.
Yeah. And just to go back to that original question, we did get some help on our business plan. We did a lot of the work ourselves because we have direct contact with the markets. And I think whether you get help or not, you always have to do a lot of work because you're the people that know your vision and your model. But we did get some support on our financial modelling, and we got that was paid through the Reach Fund and the booster funds that we had. How do you structure and administer interest payments and investment repayments? I think, was it, yeah, Josh, I think, because you're doing ours, aren't you?
Well, yeah, I mean, basically, so what I can say that what Ethex does is it provides what we call registry management services, which are basically just managing all of that. So we maintain a database of all the investors, including things like contact details and bank details. So when it comes time to make a payment, we make that payment. Obviously, you say to us, this is how much money we're going to pay out this year. The business says to us how much money we're going to pay out each year. Here's that amount of money, and then we send that out to all the individuals. Takes away a lot of the administration. And we can also do comms as well if the business wants us to do that. Some businesses, I think, like Kindling and Ecological Land Trust, if you want to do your own comms, that's fine. But if you know you've got lighter kind of capacity or resourcing, then we can do that as well. But yes, it is a bit of an administration managing investors.
Zoe, do you want to add to that at all? Or?
I mean, when we did it in-house, I mean, like Josh said earlier, we don't actually get asked for too many withdrawals, so it hasn't been too much of a problem. But we've always, as I mentioned, kept cash aside to make sure that's available for withdrawals. And the interest payments we do annually, and we do that in-house, and it's not too onerous. I feel like I might have gone off point a bit there, but maybe that's okay.
There's a question here of assuring the 5% return on investment, which do you offer the 5%, Zoe? Because we don't. we only offer up to 3. I think it's 1 to 3, which I think we based on yours. But still, this is still relevant, is how you take precautions to buffer on the teething issues such as slow establishment of agroforestry, lower yields due to unpredictable weather, and so on. Which, in a sense, Josh, you mentioned already the slower start that we give ourselves. But Zoe, do you want to?
Well, I'm just going to say there's 2 different parts of this, in the sense that, so Ecological Land Cooperative is a community landlord, so to speak. So we don't need to think about when income is coming in from trees or from other crops or livestock, whereas Kindling do need to think about that because they're actually running a farm. So when we design our business model, we design it so that we can offer a farm affordably. And what we might do, for example, is offer people to buy in with no down payment. So they're just paying a rent to begin with, and then build up those payments over a 25-year period, so that those first 5 years they have that pressure relieved. So if it was the case with Kindling, you know, I mean, we couldn't, the Ecological Land Cooperative couldn't raise a whole million for the Kindling, but if we could have, then we could have done a similar thing where they would have had some of that pressure released until they're in a position to start paying off a bit more.
Yeah. Okay. We've got I'm going to take us off finances for a minute, because there is a question of who were the type of people investing in the farms in terms of background and income. Do you know some of that, Chris?
No, but that's interesting that was brought up, because that was something we wanted to do in the next survey, actually.
We did ask a bit about if they were first investors, did we?
Yeah, I think so.
Or maybe that was just anecdotal when we were chatting to people, and quite a few people were. I don't know if either of you two know that sort of information about any of your.
I mean, sort of more generally, we do have quite a wide spectrum of investors on Ethex, but probably if you look at where we have the majority, it's probably older people 60 plus, actually. We tend to have some sort of hotspots location-wise, so the M4 corridor, Bristol, Oxford, obviously, where we're based, is quite strong, but also there are other hotspots, Manchester, Leeds, in the southwest, and increasingly Scotland as well. So, you know, it's quite wide.
Yeah, we also did, and we would have done a lot more than this if it wasn't for all the restrictions, but tried to do quite a lot of work in involving people who hadn't invested before, or trying to make it sure that it would be accessible to people who couldn't afford the whole shares, by letting groups or families invest or whatever. So, but yeah, as Chris said, we'll do a bit more work on that. Going back to the finances, how many acres and buildings and machinery are, so this again is about, for us, the farm that we purchased. We haven't yet, so just to clarify that, we haven't yet purchased a farm for Kindling Farm, where when we went, well, I don't know if you want to explain that, Chris. Sorry.
Yeah, so it was, yeah, so we had a farm lined up. We hadn't bought it yet. We went into the community shares campaign. The owner said that he wasn't ready to make a decision on selling us the farm. So he said he didn't say he wasn't going to sell it to us. But anyway, halfway through the campaign, we felt that we should inform everyone. And we had a lot of contingencies and plan Bs in place for other farms that we were potentially could look at. So then we started that. So yeah, we carried on the campaign, hopefully clearly telling everyone that we were looking for a farm, and we would give ourselves a year to find that farm, and we would put everyone's investment into a safe bank account where it would sit until we found that farm. What we did was, the business plan was built around, originally when we wrote it, like 120 odd acre farm, and then once this farm came available at the start of the campaign, all the business planning was done around that. So the machinery we would need, the state of the buildings, you know, as part of our due diligence. And then it got tweaked again for the other farm that we looked at in November. So the farm we looked at in November was actually smaller, but the soil grade was better. So yeah, there are just so many variables. But yeah, 120 acre-ish farm, lots of buildings, lots of machinery, lots of vegetables.
And then just to explain as well, there's been a few questions of whether we included the price of infrastructure and buildings and machinery in our business plan.
Yes, so the first farm, we were going to have to invest a lot of money in refurbishing the buildings. This second farm we looked at, the buildings were immaculate. And yeah, that's all in the business plan. We were looking at building refurbishments and stuff in later years with some grants and stuff like that.
Just to clarify, I'll come to you, Zoe, but that wasn't involved in the money that we were raising through community shares. The community shares was just to raise the money to buy the land, and the buildings was separate. Zoe?
Just add that the Land Workers Alliance have got some really good materials on their website, which gives examples of the cost of different infrastructure and machinery that you need for different types of farm businesses.
Great. So we've got 5 more minutes. There's a couple here. And then what I'm going to come to at the end, just tell you all, there's a question about would you do anything differently if you did it again? But I think we'll come back, so you can all have a little think about that. And Josh, you can think what you would advise people. We'll come back to that at the end. Any advice on some bridging finance to hold the land until a raise is done for the final amount?
It kind of depends on how you're legally structured, I guess. I mean, we have a good relationship with Triodos and really support farmers. We have a good relationship with Charity Bank, but you have to be a third sector organisation. They're the only two I can think of at the moment. And
also just having a really good business plan and track record and market, I think is from us, that's how we've got that trust with around the bridging loans, I think, the finance. Are you all paid for the work that you do before the farm project exists? And if so, where does your income come from? I think I'll open that up to all of you. Chris, do you want to say first?
Just so there are quite a lot of hidden costs in our campaign. Like you and I have rewritten that business plan over 3 or 4 years, many times. So it is hard to put a handle on the exact costs. We're part of a big family of organisations, and we do pull in lots and lots of favours. So yeah, and frankly, myself and Helen are funded from a private trust as part of our kind of ongoing grant program. So to run our other programs, we get support from the lottery and other people.
But we did start Kindling without getting paid. I think you do, when you set anything up, you do have to put in quite a lot of unpaid work, I'd say. I mean, I don't know about the rest of you. It's just, I think that's the way it is when you set stuff up, I would say. Zoe and Josh, do you want to say that? You don't have to, obviously.
Yeah, we did. Do you want to go first, Josh?
You go ahead, Zoe.
Yeah, like you two, initially we did put in a lot of free hours. We got very small amounts of grants, say 5,000 to do initial development work. Then when we had our first business plan and that first share offer and the first loan, we built in our wages into that business plan. So those loans and shares covered our wages, and we kept doing that going forward. So we made sure that we kept financing ourselves. But yes, we had times when we didn't get paid.
Yeah, I do get paid, and the way so Ethex generates revenues is that we charge a percentage of any monies raised through the platform. There's 2 parts. There's a fixed fee and there's a percentage fee, and that then is used to finance the rest of the business.
Okay, I'm aware there is only 2 minutes left, and it's annoying because I think there probably were some of your NERF conversations going on in the chat box, but we'll just have to carry this on later in the year. But just for the last question, if each of you want to say if there was anything you would do differently about either, for us, I guess, the campaign we ran, or same for you, Zoe and Josh, about different things, or what you would advise people to do differently, maybe. Christian?
What I'd advise people to do is start early. I can't tell you the number of times people turn up and say, I need £300,000 and we've got to buy something by the end of next month. And it's just like, that's not going to happen. So just 2 things. So one, if you're thinking of using the platform, talk to us early, start getting pull together your documentation as soon as possible. but start engaging your base now, this moment, because that's really going to provide a lot of the momentum and the driving force of the race. Is that my mind?
Great. Zoe?
I just reiterate how important the business planning part of it is. Be far more, what's the word I'm looking for? You know, you're so hopeful in your business planning, but actually things always cost so much more and take a lot more time. And on one hand, you can't be too negative, otherwise you'll probably never do it, but just try and be as realistic as possible in the business planning. Also, I just wanted to say as a sort of final comment that there are some amazing co-op developers out there who will support you, and there's quite a lot of funding available for them to do that work. I don't know if I should name drop here or not.
It might not be time. We've only got 1 minute left. We have to finish.
All right.
You can put them in the chat. Chris?
Yeah,
we've got to
just
finish right now.
As much advice as possible. Just be happy to be wrong.
Yeah, learn. But please do get in touch. Thanks so much, all of you. I'm sorry to rush the end. We have to get out of the room for other people to use it, even though it's virtual. But it was great to have you all. Definitely get in touch with us if you want to come on a larger event, and we'll try and encourage Zoe and Josh to come as well. And thank you, all of you. Thank you, speakers.